200 miles per gallon. Is it possible? Yes, by maximizing efficiency, which for cars means that we will be building a hybrid. But first, what is efficient? I find that engines run most efficient when using what I call the one-third rule. What is the one-third rule? If you run the following at one-third of their maximum, engine speed, engine load, and throttle position, or fuel consumption, or the mathematical equivalent of these, you can have the most efficient point of engine operation. This rule is subject to mathematical proof, as I am only stating this based on personal observation, but it does seem to be accurate. Here's an example. When Toyota built the Prius originally, they had designed it with a 1.5-liter engine, and it got over 40 miles per gallon. Then in the third generation, starting in 2003, Toyota increased the size of the engine to 1.8 liters. Some would say that this should have reduced the fuel economy. No, it did not. Now it makes around 50 miles per gallon. This is because the one-third level shifted towards being more efficient. The explanation? The larger engine has a larger maximum load, so the throttle didn't have to be open as far, and fuel consumption went down. And they did some other things, but the big thing was the engine. Now that we have an example of what is efficient, what can we do to maximize the efficient operation of a car? First, we need to look at the engine. The slower we can run an engine, the less fuel it should use. Gasoline engines run faster than diesels, and so are not as efficient. There are other pluses to diesel as well, which I will mention later. How else can we maximize efficiency? By conserving and using what is available. Excuse me. What are we not conserving? Power going to waste. First, the exhaust. Before it is expelled from the engine, the expanding gases power the engine and drive it forward. Then it just goes in smoke. What a waste. We must capture the power of the exhaust and use it to add power to the engine. The most understood way of doing this is to add a turbo supercharger, or just simply a turbo, to the engine. But this causes the engine to use more fuel and ruin its perfect one-third level. So, we must use another option. There is another option, and it has been known about for over 50 years. It is called the Power Recovery Turbine, or PRT. PRTs work by taking the power from the exhaust just like the turbos do, but instead of spinning a compressor, they put the power directly to the drivetrain. I learned about these turbines in a book called The Chronicle of Aviation. This book presents both types of turbines literally right next to each other. I rejected them both at first because I don't like turbo superchargers. I detest what is called turbo lag. But I kept coming back. Something about the PRT intrigued me. Finally, I looked closely and found something amazing. The book calls them turbo compound engines, but the heart is the PRT. They appear to be very different, but have many similarities. Really, the only difference is the output. The output for a turbo supercharger is the fan pushing air into the engine. The output for the Power Recovery Turbine, or PRT, is a gear, and there is no turbo lag. Here's the benefit. The PRT, by putting power directly into the drivetrain, gives us more power, but doesn't require us to use more fuel. In fact, because of how it shifts the one-third level, just like with the Prius, we can use less fuel. How does this work? Let's say that we want to build a more efficient Prius. We start with a Prius with a 1.5-liter engine. If we put a PRT with a 40% gain onto the engine, we will have more power output than the 1.8-liter engine, but will only burn as much fuel as the 1.5-liter engine, an almost 20% improvement in fuel economy. This could give a Prius an MPG rating of over 60 miles per gallon. How do I think we can do this? Let's look back at the book and see what it says was achieved in the 1950s. What it says is that the engine on the right started out at 2,700 horsepower, but with the PRTs was able to put out around 3,700 horsepower. That's about a 30% improvement. By the way, if you want to see one of these old Grand Beasts run, check out this YouTube video. The version shown puts out 3,400 horsepower. Now let's fast forward to today. We have several decades of knowledge and information on how to build turbines now. The field is open to new ideas and processes. With what we know now, an improvement of over 30% gain seems possible. Would someone please prove me wrong, or, even better, prove me right? There's one bubble burster to this, and that is designing them to work with an engine. Turbos have a power band just like anything else. That is why diesels are an even better choice to use because they run slower, making the power band of the turbine more accessible. There's one last thing to ask before continuing, and that is this. Can we get power from more than one turbine at a time with a piston engine? It's possible in a jet engine to have multiple turbines in the exhaust stream. So why not several turbines in series on a piston engine? Not parallel or sequential, but one after another, all being powered at the same time. I don't see why not, and it can get some amazing power returns. Think of what would happen if we had a power gain of 100%. We could have a 3-liter engine pulling as hard as a 6-liter engine while still getting 30 or so miles per gallon. I would take that. So, how far can we go? Now, onto another waste. The next waste is also coming from the exhaust, and it is heat. I have an idea that could capture the power of heat, but I have no idea how to do it, so it's a fantasy, but here it is anyhow. Heat is transmitted by infrared radiation. We all know that we can detect this radiation and show where things are by infrared goggles or other detecting devices. So, what about making a photovoltaic or solar type cell that is tuned to the infrared wavelength? If this wavelength could be absorbed, just like visible light, and can create electrical power, we could boost the electrical power output of the engine by wrapping these cells around the exhaust pipe. And there are other possible uses. There are other heat sources, albeit not as hot as the exhaust. The coolant is available, and so is the oil. Both get heated with use, collect their energy, and conserve it. Now, if this panel cooled by absorbing the radiated heat, many other things could be cooled that have little to do with cars. From solar panels to microchips, the possibilities are endless. The more power you gather, the more you conserve, and the less you waste. Plus, the more electricity you have to power the car. It's a win-win combination. Okay, on to the next waste. Braking. Anytime brakes are applied, a tremendous amount of kinetic energy is lost as heat. It literally goes up in smoke. There is a way to conserve this power. It is called regenerative braking. Regenerative braking has the ability to conserve most, if not all, of the energy built up by acceleration. Now to capture it. You see, batteries become the next problem of non-efficiency. They can't absorb fast enough. There is a solution to this. There is another type of storage device called a capacitor. Capacitors can hold power, but most importantly they can capture any power that is put to them, that they are rated for of course, and they can do it almost instantly. So, any power created by the engine generator, by regenerative braking, or any other source of power is conserved by absorption into the capacitors and is not lost or wasted. This is the final waste to conserve and make efficient. Now, what do we do with all of these technologies? Okay, here goes the punchline. It's what all of these explanations are for. Let's say that we have a hybrid car with a 1-liter diesel engine running at over 100 miles per gallon by itself. It has maximum power gain from the PRTs, and with all of its heat sources being harvested into electricity, is putting out around 40,000 watts. This may be slightly unrealistic, but it's a hypothesis, and I'm hoping it's a realistic and good one. Now, powering this car, we have a high-efficiency electric motor that is using around 20,000 watts to drive the car forward. All of the extra power is being harvested and gathered by the capacitors, so none is wasted. Then the capacitors fill completely, so we have no need to generate power and shut the engine off, or at least let it drop to idle. We run for a distance on the capacitors with the engine off, upping our average MPG. Then when the capacitor is empty, we start up the engine to begin the cycle all over again. If we are able to run this cycle with the engine on only half of the time, then we will double our fuel mileage. And if we started out with a diesel that makes over 100 miles per gallon to begin with, then doubling our miles per gallon will give us over 200 miles per gallon. I don't see why not. If you don't believe me, that's fine. Prove me wrong. Or, better yet, prove me right. That's my presentation. Thank you.